The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It's, well, a pretty dramatic quote, right? Often debated.
Definitely packs a punch. Or maybe think Asimov. It is not change that endangers the individual, but lack of adaptability.
Exactly. And in politics, adaptability.
Oh.
Well, it seems like everything sometimes. Today, we're diving deep into a story out of South Korea that really captures this. The, let's say, remarkable and often chaotic journey of Lee Jae-myung. He's now the frontrunner for the presidency.
Yeah, remarkable is the word. His path has been anything but straightforward. You know, just when it looked like legal troubles, scandals, we're going to completely sideline him.
Boom, a constitutional crisis hits.
Exactly. And somehow, maybe counterintuitively, that chaos seems to have actually cleared his path, putting him right at the front.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to unpack what our source material, mainly a really thorough report from the BBC, tells us about this. We want to get a handle on the forces shaping his story.
Right. His background, which is pretty unique, his political style, definitely controversial, the legal battles, the threats he's faced, even an assassination attempt.
And that huge turning point, the martial law incident, plus the legal cloud that, well, it's still hanging over him.
And understanding this is, I think, pretty critical right now. If you're following global politics, or maybe you're prepping for exams like the UPSC, where these kinds of political dynamics are key. Or
honestly, if you're just curious about how power shifts and how nations navigate these really turbulent times, this story has it all. So let's jump in.
Okay.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Lee Jae-myung's origins. They're really quite different from a lot of the South Korean political establishment. Born 1963, small mountain village.
Yeah, and facing real economic hardship, the family struggled. He actually skipped middle school entirely to go work illegally at that age.
But that early work life was incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
The source mentions these industrial accidents he had as a young factory worker.
It's quite harrowing. Caught his fingers in a power belt. And then, even worse, at just 13, a press machine crushed his wrist, leaving him with a permanent arm injury.
Wow. Imagine starting out like that. It makes his later achievements, especially in education, seem even more, well, extraordinary.
Absolutely. Despite all that, he taught himself, passed the entrance exams, high school in 78, university in 80.
And then gets into law school on a full scholarship.
Yeah.
Passes the bar in 1986.
Just sheer grit, really. And then he spends nearly 2 decades as a human rights lawyer, fighting for others, before he actually gets into politics formally, around 2005. Joined the Uri Party then.
So that foundation as an activist lawyer is key before he moves into office. Becomes mayor of Sienyam in 2010, known for implementing some free welfare policies there.
Right, and then later governor of Gyeonggi province in 2018, which is a much bigger stage.
His political style, though, often described as, what, bullish, confrontation.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. He pushes for progressive reforms. Remember that universal basic income pledge during his 2022 campaign. He's definitely seen as someone challenging the old guard, the status quo.
And this background, this style, it seems to make him incredibly divisive. The BBC piece quotes Dr. Lee Jae, calling him highly controversial and unconventional, an outsider.
Exactly that. I mean, his story rising from poverty, fighting his way up, it really connects with working-class voters, people who feel left out. They see him as one of them.
But then that same confrontational approach, that sort of aggressive style, it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Elites, political opponents, especially in the conservative PPP, they see him as abrasive, maybe untrustworthy.
And you know, his career hasn't been free of personal controversy either. The source points to earlier things, like a drink driving charge back in 2004.
Right, and disputes with relatives that became public later on, and those allegations of an extramarital affair around 2018.
It's interesting because South Korea can be quite conservative about the private lives of public figures. These things haven't always sunk politicians there, but they definitely added to this image of him being maybe unpredictable, unconventional, for sure.
Still, those earlier issues compared to what came later.
Yeah, they sort of pale in comparison to the more recent legal threats, the ones that really seem like they could end his presidential hopes.
Okay, let's shift gears to that. The BBC report goes into detail on these ongoing cases. There's one set of charges from 2023 about alleged corruption, bribery, breach of trust, tied to a land development project from his time as mayor.
Right, but the source actually highlights another legal fight as being even more critical. And this one is about whether he knowingly lied during a presidential debate back in December 2021.
Ah, okay. The specific lie was denying he personally knew Kim Moon-ki, a key figure in a different corruption scandal, who had actually died just days before that debate. Why is that seen as more critical?
Well, it goes right to the heart of trust, doesn't it? Corruption charges are serious, obviously. But being accused of deliberately misleading the public, especially in a high-stakes debate.
Right, that hits differently. It's about perceived honesty, integrity.
Exactly. Especially in a political climate where public trust is already fragile, it can be incredibly damaging to a candidate's character.
Okay, that makes sense. And the legal journey for this specific case has been a real roller coaster.
Oh, absolutely. So initially, November 2024, he was convicted, got a 1-year suspended prison sentence.
Okay. Yeah.
But then, in March, an appeals court actually overturned that conviction, acquitted him.
So cleared.
Well, not quite, because then South Korea's Supreme Court stepped in and overturned the appeals court's decision.
Wow. So as of when the source was reported, the case is essentially back waiting for a final Supreme Court ruling.
Precisely. Which brings us to the stakes. What happens if that initial guilty verdict is ultimately upheld?
The consequences sound huge. The source says he'd likely lose his seat in the National Assembly.
And crucially, be barred from running for president for 5 years.
That's potentially game over for his political career.
It really could be. So you have these massive legal threats looming. But that wasn't the only danger he faced recently.
No, there was also that assassination attempt in January 2024. Just incredible.
Shocking incident. He was out talking to reporters near a construction site in Busan. A man comes up, pretends to ask for an autograph.
And stabs him in the neck.
Yeah. Injured his jugular vein, needed surgery. Thankfully, he recovered. But, imagine.
It completely changed everything for his security, obviously.
Absolutely. Now he campaigns behind bulletproof glass, wears a bulletproof vest. He's got agents with those ballistic briefcases all around him.
And the attacker. His motive was reportedly just to stop Lee from ever becoming president. Got 15 years in prison.
Yeah. And that attack happening amidst all this political tension, it really highlighted just how polarized things had become in South Korea.
That rivalry between Lee and the president at the time, Yoon Suk Yeol, had become incredibly bitter, right?
Extremely. The source mentions a Hanky Yoris survey from late 2023 showing over half the respondents felt the political divide was getting worse.
And there's an argument, which the BBC piece touches on, that the Democratic Party, with Lee as leader, kind of fueled this, constantly blocking Yoon's government, fighting his budgets, pushing impeachments against his officials.
Right. It created this dynamic where Yoon was effectively a lame duck president, politically gridlocked, facing immense pressure and frustration.
And all that pressure on Yoon, it seems like it set the stage for something truly drastic. December 2024.
Yeah, December 3rd. President Yoon takes this absolutely extraordinary step, declares martial law.
Martial law, citing a need to root out anti-state forces, North Korea sympathizers. That has such heady historical baggage in South Korea.
Huge. And Lee's reaction, it was immediate. Pivotal, really.
What did he do?
Within hours, he goes on a live stream, appeals directly to the people, tells them, get down to the National Assembly, protest this.
And people came out.
Thousands responded. There were clashes with police, military units were deployed, opposition lawmakers rushed the assembly building itself.
And Lee was there in person.
Right in the thick of it. He reportedly climbed over the fence to get into the National Assembly building himself, join the other lawmakers inside.
To do what?
To quickly pass a resolution lifting the martial law, which they did.
That swift action, the public backlash, the political fallout must have been immediate.
Oh, absolutely. The Democratic Party moved to impeach President Yoon almost straight away after the martial law was rescinded.
And the Constitutional Court eventually upheld the impeachment.
Unanimously. On April 4th, 2025, Yoon was removed from office.
So this whole constitutional crisis, triggered by Yoon's own move, basically just swept his main political rival out of the way.
Completely. It cleared the path for Lee's presidential bid. He resigned as party leader on April 9th, specifically to focus on the run.
And then won the party primary pretty easily.
Overwhelming support, yeah. Selected as their candidate on April 27th.
Meanwhile, Yoon's attempt at martial law, total disaster for him, ended his presidency, left his party, the PPP.
In tatters, as the source puts it.
Right. And while the whole thing was chaotic for everyone, it seems like Lee Jae-myung was uniquely positioned to benefit.
Absolutely. The BBC report makes it pretty clear. Of anyone who might have leveraged that chaos, nobody gained more than Lee.
Which brings us pretty much up to date. Lee is now the frontrunner, the electoral favorite for the election coming up on June 3rd.
But there's still that huge but, isn't there? That critical legal uncertainty we talked about.
The false statement case. Still waiting for that final Supreme Court verdict.
Exactly. And here's the latest twist on that. The courts actually agreed to Lee's request to postpone his hearings until after the election.
Wait, so he could actually win the presidency?
And then potentially be convicted after taking office? Yes.
Wow. That's a remarkable situation.
It really is. And the BBC piece kind of ends that section with this thought. South Korea just went through massive political turmoil and impeachment. But the leadership drama might not be over yet.
It really highlights how tangled up legal challenges and democratic outcomes can get, especially when they're happening at the same time.
Yeah. So if we step back, what have we seen? Lee Jae-young's journey from this incredibly tough, unconventional background, a career marked by constant scandals, legal battles, even physical threats.
Into suddenly being propelled to the front of the presidential race because his main rival self-destructed in this massive constitutional crisis.
But his position now is, well, precarious, isn't it? Leading the polls, looks set for the Blue House, but with this massive legal verdict hanging over him, a verdict that could still change everything, maybe even after the election results are in.
It's such a complex, compelling story, a real case study in political resilience, maybe, the role crisis plays in shaping who leads, and this really fascinating, maybe slightly worrying intersection of law and democracy.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What happens if a leader chosen by the people is then found legally unable to serve or has their legitimacy questioned by the courts right after taking power?
Yeah. So whether you're digging into current affairs for something like the UPSC exams, or you just want to be better informed about global events, or frankly, if you just find these unpredictable political stories fascinating.
This situation in South Korea offers a lot to unpack. Real insights into power, law, and how they interact, often unpredictably.
We really hope this deep dive, looking closely at the BBC source material, has helped you connect some of those dots, understand this pretty remarkable turn of events.
And if you did find this breakdown useful and you'd like more deep dives into important global topics like this one, please do consider liking this or subscribing to our channel.
We'd also genuinely love to hear your perspective. What stands out most to you in this whole saga? Do you have other questions about what might happen next? Drop us a comment below.
And just a reminder, our main source for this discussion was the BBC.
Thanks so much for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another look at a critical topic.